Hey everyone, welcome to my new video tutorial. I'm May Park and today I'm going to show you how to create a one layer messy watercolor card with lots of layers and splatters. When it comes to watercoloring, I love to create a light and transparent look of watercolors by letting water do my most of the work. So I usually use lots of water and less pigments and try not to go over same areas over and over to avoid heavy layers. But this time I'm going to try something different and create a messy watercolor card which almost looks like I intentionally ruined my watercoloring by adding some muddy or desaturated colors. My inspiration came from the on-layer watercolor card that I created for Altenew 5th anniversary blog hop earlier this month. In case you want to check out how I made this card, I'll add a link to my blog post on the description box below. For today's card, I'm going to follow the layout of my old card and use the similar color scheme, but as I mentioned, I'll watercolor my images a little bit differently this time. Today, I'm going to use the engraved flower stem set from Altenew because the images have beautiful details that will help me where to add my shades and highlights. If you are not good at masking technique, I highly recommend that you test out your placement of each image by stamping the images on A2 size scratch paper. That way you will know which image you should stamp first to place it in the foreground. I haven't decided which sentiment I'll use for my card, so I pulled out a few stamp sets that include some of my favorite sentiments. When it comes to watercoloring, it's important to choose a high-quality watercolor paper. So I mostly use Artist Cold Press 140-pound watercolor paper, which is my favorite. But this time I use Canson Cold Press 140-pound watercolor paper as it was sitting on my desk for some reason. Blending on the colors wasn't the best on the Canson watercolor paper, but it still worked. I'm going to use my original Misty stamping tool as I know I'll need to stamp my images a few times at the same position to get a nice black impression. I placed my A2 size watercolor panel inside the Misty stamping tool and I'm using my magnets to hold the paper in place. I'm using the sentiments printed on the acetate sheet to decide which sentiments will fit in the middle of my card front. I'm temporarily matching my stamps with the sentiment area on my test paper. It's a great way when you decide the font and size of your sentiment before you actually stamp it on your card front. I'm going to stamp the sentiments from the Smile More stamp set towards the top of my watercolor panel using Altenew permanent black ink. To get a better black ink impression, I'm going to stamp each sentiment twice with the same ink. You can use the black pen to fix your stamping and enhance the black color if you want to. This is one of my all-time favorite sentiments. Everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end. I chose this sentiment because I'm going to send this card to one of my friends who is going through tough times in her life. Next, I'm going to pull out the large floral image from the engraved flower stamp set and position it on the bottom right corner of my panel. After picking up the stamp with the Misty Door, I'm going to ink up my stamp with alternate permanent black ink, which is waterproof, and stamp it onto my panel. Then I'm going to stamp the same image on a post-it note to create a mask. I'm going to cut out the image on the post-it note with my scissors. I recommend you cut slightly inside of the stamping line. That way you can get more perfect stamping while masking the images. I'm going to layer my mask of the stamped image on my panel, covering the image completely. By the way, my post-it note has a full adhesive on the back, so I don't need any glue to place it on my panel. If you don't have post-it notes with a full adhesive, you can stamp your image on a print paper and use a temporary glue tape instead. Next, I'm going to stamp the second flower, positioning my stamp partially onto the mask. Then I'm going to clean my stamp with a baby wipe before moving on to the next image. As you can see, I store my used baby wipes in a small bowl to prevent my paper from getting wet by accident. The reason I stamped the large-sized flower first is that I wanted to place my large flower in the foreground while having small flowers and leaves partially behind the large flower. Stamping the large image first also helps me find the placement of other images with balance. I'm going to continue stamping and masking until I finish creating my own floral arrangement around the sentiment. Masking takes time, but once you remove all the masks, you can see the beauty of masking technique. If you want to create a soft look of watercoloring, you can stamp the images with embossing ink and heat emboss them with white embossing powder. Especially if you are in the beginner level of watercoloring, heat embossed images will help you stay inside the outlines while watercoloring. Or you could stamp the images with a light color of water-based ink for no-line watercoloring. But here I'm stamping my images with black ink to create intense outlines. Once my stamping is done, I'm going to put my stamps back into the original packaging so I don't lose them while I'm working on my project. By the way, I use alcohol prep pads to clean my misty door. I bought a pack of alcohol pads from Costco, and this pad helps me clean my misty door perfectly without any ink left. I've been using this cleaning method for several months since I watched Jennifer McGuire using it in her videos. It's now time to do some watercoloring. I'm going to use watercolor brush markers from Altenew. Each set comes in a 10 vibrant colors and they blend easily with water and different colored brushes. Each barrel is filled with water-based ink and you can gently push the barrel until the ink comes out. You can easily apply color straight from the marker or dilute with water for a softer look. In this video, I'll be using a number 3 watercolor paintbrush to pick up the ink and blend in colors. I'll be taping down my watercolor paper onto the chipboard seat using washi tape. This will help me rotate my panel easily without touching the panel while watercoloring. I'm going to scribble my watercolor brush markers on the well of my water media mat so I can easily pick up the inks with my watercolor paintbrush. There are many different ways to watercolor images. Today I'll be showing you an easy way to watercolor your floral images and share a couple of tips on how to add interest and depth on your images. Once I pick up some medium dark color from my palette with my watercolor paintbrush, I'm applying the color to the bottom of each petal and where two petals meet together to indicate the shading areas. You can start by wetting your watercolor paper first with clean water if you want to. Make sure to use less water for your first application as it's important to have intense color in the beginning. Before the stroke is dry, I'm going to take my watercolor paintbrush and pull the color out from the darker stroke. Next, I'm going to go over the paint to diffuse the color using my watercolor paintbrush by adding a bit of water to the ink. And I'll be loosely watercoloring each petal with less pigment and lots of water to color entire petals. Next, I'll be bringing in some darker colors to enhance the shading areas. Please note that I'm leaving some white areas to indicate the highlights on the petals in the beginning, but they mostly will be covered with some colors in the end. Depending on your preference, you can let the first layer dry before adding the second layer, but this time I'm not going to worry about the drying time. Some of the layers will dry before applying darker colors, but I will leave some of the layers still wet to achieve the unexpected blending effect. To create a gradient look of the color, it's important to remove the ink from your watercolor paintbrush and wipe off the excess ink using a towel in between before you pull out the color. Again, I'm not gonna worry about this too much for today's project. Usually, you can get a better result when you stay away from adding too many layers on your watercolor images. But I won't be afraid of adding more layers and details this time as I really wanted to go crazy and get messy with my watercolors. You can always go over the image to diffuse the color or to add more color. You just need to control the amount of water you add to the ink. Adding different color is also a great way to create some interest to your image. If you make a mistake with your watercolors or you have some paints went outside of outline, you can fix it by adding some clean water on the paper and picking up the colors with a paper towel or paintbrush. But I will intentionally go outside of outlines to create a controlled, messy look. Now I'm going to turn on some music and speed up the process, and I'll be back once I'm done coloring. You can stop here if you want to, but I'll be adding some details using white watercolor paint. I will just trace some of the black stamping lines to mimic the shape of petals and add some dust here and there. Next, I'm mounting my watercolor panel on the A2 size top folding white card base using double-sided tape. You could use glue tape if you want, but strong adhesive helps your watercolor paper stay flat and sturdy. I'm going to splatter the background with some of the ink colors I used on my flowers and leaves. Before creating the splatters, I'm covering my sentiments with a post-it note to protect them from the ink splatters. To create splatters, I'm going to pick up the ink from my palette using a small paintbrush and tap the body of my paintbrush with my finger. If you don't want your colors to mix up together, make sure to dry the previous splatters using a heat tool before you add the next splatters using a different color. This splatter technique is a bit random but can create some very fun results. So I strongly recommend you to give it a try if you haven't done it yet. If you are not good at creating splatters, you could use the tip of your colored pen to add tiny dots. Next, I'm going to remove the post-it note and add some dots around my sentiments using my watercolor paintbrush. Then I'm going to set my watercolor cards aside for about 10 to 20 minutes to let it air dry. This is it for today. If you watched all the way to the end, thank you so much. I hope this video was inspiring or informative for you guys. I'll link all the products and everything that I talked about in the description box below. If you have any questions, just write them below and I'll be happy to answer them for you. If you enjoyed my video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. If you haven't done it yet, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel for more card making videos. Thank you for watching and thank you for being here, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye bye!